HR leaders, what's on your mind these days? Is it AI? Is it the economy? The talent market? Remote work? Retention? DEI? Pay transparency? New laws? Our 2024 Workplace Trends Report outlines how HR leaders are thinking about these challenges and what they believe will help their organizations overcome them. Want to find out what they said? Head on over to peoplemanagingpeople.com/Workplace Trends 2024 and download the report to find out.
Your career is on the track and trajectory that you're excited about, but out of nowhere, it's derailed. Your career is no longer on the path you hoped for or planned for. My guest today is no stranger to this, as she was performing at the top of her game, winning awards, and out of the blue, she was let go from her job. My guest today, Berta Aldrich, is a highly decorated leader, author, C-suite advisor, speaker, and self-described pragmatist whose mission is to inspire the design of high-performing, diverse organizations across the globe. She is a highly sought-after expert and speaker on the topics of leadership, high performance, diversity, and transformational change. Her first book, Winning the Talent Shift: 3 Steps to Unleashing the High-Performance Workplace, was rated as a #1 book to buy on company culture and #3 on customer experience by Book Authority. In today's episode, we take a deep dive into the one thing that can derail your career. But most importantly, what can you do about it? So please stay tuned. We're People Managing People, and our purpose is to build a better world of work. We're owners, founders, entrepreneurs. We're middle managers, team leaders. We represent every business function in an organization. And we're on mission to help people lead and manage their teams and organizations more effectively. So if you want to lead and manage better, and if you want to become a better organizational leader and more effective people manager, then join us. I'm your host, Tim Reitsma, and keep listening to find inspiration, actionable insights, and tools you need to recruit, retain, and manage and lead your people and organizations more effectively. And while you're listening to the show, please subscribe and join our mailing list on peoplemanagingpeople.com. Join our community of leaders and follow us on social media to stay up to date with all that's going on. Welcome to the People Managing People podcast, Berta. I am so excited to have you here. And I have to say, I'm reading your book right now, Winning the Talent Shift: 3 Steps to Unleashing the New High Performance Workplace. And there is so much gold in this book. Why don't we start off by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and what prompted you to writing this book?
Absolutely. And first of all, I have been so excited to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for helping leaders navigate, I'm sure, the very choppy waters that they're experiencing today in their workplaces. So very happy to be here. So a little bit about myself. I am a published author, speaker, and award-winning C-suite executive turned leadership coach. And my passion is really in helping aspiring and high-performing leaders to create their own outperformance and their own success. So that's what I do. But your second question is interesting. There's an interesting backstory to how this book actually came about, and it's fairly serendipitous. So unlike other books in bookstores today, mine was never intended to be published at all.
Yeah, I was reading that in the book, and so I was hoping you were going to go there and we can talk about that, because it's that piece is fascinating to me.
It is because, and you know what that says is it was really written authentically. I actually wrote it for our daughter who was entering college. And, as I continued to mentor both men and women in the workplace, from outside the workplace, I kept hearing very similar stories, stories of how they were getting derailed from others in the workplace. Sometimes they were colleagues, sometimes they were bosses, sometimes they were executives from other parts of the organization. And I thought, you know what, here is this talented young woman who is going to enter the workplace, and this is what she's going to encounter. So as someone who had 30 plus years of experience, I sat down and I thought, I'm going to write her a book. I'm going to give it to her at college graduation, and it is going to tell her everything that she could possibly encounter in the workplace, along with solutions on how she could professionally manage them. And as I began to research for the book for her, I have a master's in strategy and statistics. My original hypothesis was that this derailing activity typically happens only to women. And as I began to research, the data points that I started finding and connecting actually led me down a very different path. And so the answer is it's not just women. I'm sure we'll get into the answer here in a little bit. But then I spoke to Lauren, and she said, "Mom, you need to tell more people about this." And so, again, in a situation where serendipity and 1 in a million chance events are the only explanation for this, I was connected to a publisher, and within 6 months, it was on bookshelves across the globe.
Wow. So it started off as, I could just think of like, that's the ultimate gift for your child is here's what I've learned in corporate America over the last however many years of my career. And what a gift. And I think that is, it's pretty cool that you thought of that and you thought of your daughter. And so, and then it hit bookshelves. And so what was the intent when it hit bookshelves? Like, was it to, just publish a book and say, okay, I've published a book, and what have you been able to do with this book now?
Yeah, you know what? Because it didn't start off with kind of, I want the notoriety of being a published author. It wasn't that at all. Mm-hmm. It was more about getting this message out across the globe to help people. Because, you're reading the book now, and the goal is, if you create awareness around these derailers, hopefully we can eliminate them from the workplace. Because if people know what they are, the imposter leaders that we're encountering are less likely to perform them in the workplace because they won't work. They won't work against the high performers.
Yeah, it's I hadn't necessarily heard the term of derail your career from that perspective until we connected a number of weeks back. And, I think we could have hit record on the podcast or recorded that conversation because it was so rich. And so I want to take just a little step back. And so we're going to talk about leaders and imposter leaders, as you said. What does leadership mean to you?
Wow, I love that question. Okay, so let's do this. First of all, I believe that leadership is the highest honor that anyone can have in any capacity, particularly in the business world. And, if you think about it, it's such a complex job and career choice for most people because you are the conduit between creating value for your company and the people who need to deliver that value. It requires a balance of talent and skills, but also personal characteristics like character and ambition and intellect and the ability to learn and apply it. It requires building trust. And of course, my favorite characteristic of all, which I talk about in the book, which is courage. And today, leaders require the healthiest amount of courage, particularly the high performers. And of course, it's not for reasons that they think, which we're going to talk about today. But to me, leadership is just an incredible honor. And as someone who has had the honor of leading people from, I think, the time I was maybe 14 or 15 into the workplace and in different capacities, it's an incredible honor.
It is. And I think anybody who is thinking about picking up the book, I really encourage you to page or chapter 1 really just talks about great leaders are inspiring visionaries, develop, promote high performers, passion, deliver great results, give credit where it's due, and stand back and watch your team excel. I just love that. I just love the kind of the poetry in that, because that is that inspiring leader.
It is. Yeah. And that's what we talk about most often, but unfortunately, we'll talk about the other side as well. You do need courage in order to perform all those activities.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes it's easier to read the words than to put it into action. And there's a lot of things that get in your way. There's a lot of barriers. You could talk about just your own imposter syndrome and how that works, and maybe you overcome that. But there's other barriers that get in your way. And so, you talk about these barriers. I think part one is about why we need to shift, and part two is about removing the barriers. And so let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about the barriers that stand in the way that we need to talk about.
Yes, let's do it, because I think you eloquently put it at the top of the hour, which is these barriers in and of themselves don't sound bad. The term barrier, but when you talk about barrier as a career derailer, that really puts into action what they truly are. So you're absolutely right. The first part of the book is for those who strategically like to understand the why of the movement and how our workplaces really got to this point. And then the whole middle part of the book is the original content that was written for Lauren. And so again, very authentic. It talks a lot about the different derailers, the 3 different types of derailers, and but also it gives solutions. So if you're a leader, it will tell you how to professionally intervene and redirect an individual, and then also corporations. But so let's jump in. So what exactly is a career derailer? So maybe we can start there. Does that sound good?
Sounds perfect.
Okay, because that's opening Pandora's box, and then I think we'll end up getting where we need to go. So first of all, I think any leader can acknowledge that their career is ups and downs, right? And during the down times, most people tend to believe that a career derailment, which is, I always make it analogous to a train derailment, because people can get that picture in their mind. It simply just gets off track. It doesn't mean that it's over. It just simply jumped the track for now. They seem to think that career derailment is something that occurs when maybe a project didn't go as well as they thought, or maybe they are somehow in the doghouse with someone else in the organization for some unforeseeable mistake. And that's what most people think. But career derailment actually probably occurs some of the time like that. But the number one career derailment that I found in my research are unchecked people within your workplace who are average to low performers, but use tactics to take others, mostly great leaders and high performers, off their upward trajectory. And if you read the book, we call them imposter leaders, because they're simply imposters. They're not leaders. They just simply occupy leadership positions.
Wow. So anybody who's listening and thinking, okay, there's this term I'm hearing, imposter leader. How do I know if I'm an imposter leader? Or how do I know if I'm working with an imposter leader?
That's a great question, because you know what? Most people know it. Because again, most of these derailers that occur in organizations today are acceptable, embedded cultural traits that people know are wrong, but there's no infrastructure, there's no way to combat it. So it could be an individual who steals credit from others. It could be someone who simply looks at their people as the conduit to making them look good. They could be someone with sharp elbows who looks at and views everyone as their competition. A lot of times they have very low self-esteem and very low confidence.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a number of things that even come up in my mind throughout my career that kind of ring true to what you're saying. Somebody who may actually be taking credit for the work that you've done, or who is, just that bully getting their way in the organization.
Absolutely. And they do it by, kind of blocking and tackling others in order to do it.
Yeah. So as we were meeting and talking about this podcast and the recording, what is that one thing that will derail your career if you're not prepared for it? Is it that imposter leader?
It actually is. And that's the number one derailer that I found in the data. So a little bit of backdated information for your listeners. Most people don't understand that 70% of women in the workplace have encountered degrading and derailing behavior. 35% of men have experienced this behavior. People of color experience it at a higher rate than whites. And the big kicker here, the big aha moment, and the reason that really compelled me to publish the book was that 100% of high performers will encounter derailing behaviors. Now, if you contrast that with 80% of leaders today are rated good to poor. So you step back and you say, okay, so the ones who are actually, most of them who are making it into the leadership positions are good to poor. And most of the ones that are high performers who should be in those roles, 100% of them are getting derailed. You now have your answer to our leadership dilemma and conundrum that we have in our workplaces today.
That's some amazing findings. I hadn't put that together before. People who, we're gonna come into derailers in our career. It sounds like that's just inevitable, and it's that. What do we do about it? That's that key piece, right? It's how do we respond?
And you're so correct. And if there's one thing that your leaders can take away from this podcast, it will happen to you. After the book was published, I've received emails and phone calls from across the globe, from other countries, from the US, across the globe, who have told me their personal stories. And of course, due to confidentiality, I would never share them. But in total, I have received stories from CEOs, from others in the C-suite, from women who sit on boards, to men who sit on boards, all the way into the mid-levels of organizations where this has happened to them and they had no idea what it was. They just knew that they were sideways in their careers. They knew that what was happening wasn't right, that they were a top performer up until this certain incident happened, but it ended up taking them off their upward trajectory. And in probably 80% of the cases of the people that I spoke to directly, 80% of them quit their job. And they were terrific leaders with fantastic results and a resume that would make anyone, anyone's heart sing and want to work for them.
Wow. 80% have left their jobs. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. And let's talk about that for a minute, because as you mentioned, it's these leaders who may be from, if you look at a traditional org structure, maybe on top or below you, who are unchecked but have kind of figured out the politics of the organization to get to where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And it's like these folks are saying, just get out of my way. And mm-hmm. And so that's so disheartening, to be honest. It's so disheartening to hear that.
It is. And, there's a little bit of strategy in the book. And, real quick, if you look back at the history of and kind of the old world mechanics of management, there used to be a time when senior executives would actually encourage infighting in order to identify their best performers. So they thought if they could actually create hyper competitiveness, the best would end up rising to the top. Well, that type of philosophy is still being used today in modern workplaces. The only problem is that it actually derails, for lack of a better term, mm-hmm. diversity efforts and high performance. It actually has the opposite effect today on women, people of color, and most men.
Yeah.
So that old world tactic is not working. And that's what we need to change within our organizations, because those people are perpetuating over competition. And because of that, they're again derailing the highest performers.
Yeah, it just makes me think, man, we need to do better as leaders in organizations. We need to make sure that we're in check and make sure that we are just being aware of what's happening around us and the teams that are, whether it's a small team or large team, big company, small company. As leaders, it's our responsibility to hold each other in check and to be able to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, and you know what, I am, if you read any of my LinkedIn posts or anything, you'll see that I am a huge advocate of gender balanced teams. My highest performing teams were always comprised of both men and women. And what I would say about the men in our organizations is once they know this information, once they're aware of the content in Winning the Talent Shift, I have also received so many phone calls and asking me to help them create a business that's friendly to integrated, diverse work teams. And so again, this is an awareness issue, and I think we all need to do better. Quite honestly, 65% of the perpetrators in the workplace are men, but 35% are women. And so it's coming from both sides.
Mm-hmm. It's coming from both sides, but those are still compelling stats that that men who are listening to this podcast, we need to put ourselves in check. It's the data shows it. There was one stat I was reading in the book, just the amount of the percentage of men to women who are leaving their jobs. I mean, women are leaving at 2 times the rate of men. Mm-hmm. And it's a stat that's a number of years old, but I could just imagine that it's 2021 now. It's probably not a whole lot has changed. And, often people don't leave a company that they just love being at. They might love being at that company, but something is going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually the statistics since the book was published have actually gotten worse. We had 2 million women leave the workforce in 2020. You have 45% of women rethinking their careers in 2021. So now compound that with the fact that, even in finance, for example, 50% of employees are women. So just think about if you lost half of them to another industry, or if they decided to stay home. You're losing some of your highest performing leaders who drive some of your highest revenue and typically lead the most highly engaged teams. And when you think about, when we talk about high performers can actually impact the organization 2 to 5 times that of an average performer. So if you just think about productivity and the bottom line, companies cannot literally afford to lose their high performers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We can't afford to lose them, lose high performers. Often I've heard so many stories of people who've left their job and a high paying job for reasons that that's not necessarily about the money. It's just what's been going on internally. Mm-hmm. And people have taken lower salaries or, left a prestigious career because they just couldn't handle how the business has been run. And,
right.
And so, as we're going through this conversation, we've identified some of the characteristics of that imposter leader, somebody who is, that mediocre performer, someone who is that, I almost see this like egocentric person, just get out of my way. I'm going to take credit for everything to get to the top. I don't care who I, roll over along the way. And so, you mentioned a bit ago about courage. So how does courage fit into this?
Yeah, that's another great question. So when I talk about courage, a lot of people think that they have to be this warrior in the workplace that's going to go advocate for, significant change, transformational change. But to me, courage is every day that you walk into the workplace that you make it one step better than it was the day before. That's courage. Courage starts small, and courage then helps you create confidence. And confidence then helps you create change. And with change, you then have the opportunity for greater success. So everything to me starts with courage. And that means, we can talk through some specific examples for your listeners on how they can create that courage in certain circumstances where these imposter leaders are using derailing behaviors. So if you want to head there, we can talk about that.
I'd love to. Let's head there for a little bit.
All right, let's do it. So one of the most common derailers that high performers experience is body language intimidation. And again, we don't talk about this a lot, but the purpose of the intimidation, really the goal is the same, regardless of how they use it. It's to exert power over you and diminish your performance. So this can manifest in a variety of ways, such as, let's say, aggressive body language in a meeting while you're speaking. So for example, someone in the meeting while you're speaking folds their arms, or they look down, or maybe even they roll their eyes. Or another tactic that is sometimes used is, let's say you're in a one-on-one with an individual and the other person is standing while you're sitting, which seems nuanced, but it's not. What that does is actually changes the balance in the room. So keep in mind, if someone is doing this, if someone's standing and you're sitting, really what they're trying to do is physically exert power over you. What does that do to you psychologically? You don't even know that it's happening. But of course, there's an intimidation factor. And what does intimidation do? It decreases your confidence. And when you have decreased confidence, you're not at the top of your game. So that is one tactic that I see used quite often against high performers, and they don't even know what the true purpose is. They know that something's wrong, and sometimes in meetings, they end up focusing on this individual because they want to turn them around, right? They want to convince them of what they're speaking about. And typically it backfires because that's not what the person is really intending to do.
It's as you're speaking, I was thinking of an example of my career where I reported a number of years ago, reported to the general manager, CEO of the business, and he would intentionally make sure his laptop is closed. There's nothing on his screen. Often we would sit at a little meeting table inside his office with just our notebooks. Yes. Just because it's the intentionality of what's going on. It's come prepared. If you have an agenda or something, print it off. I don't want any tech in the office. But I've also had leaders where you're in a one-on-one giving an update and you know that they're not paying attention because their eyes are darting around their screen looking at something else. And it has a play on, maybe not today, tomorrow, but it adds up. And those are like a micro behavior that has an effect on you.
It does. And then, to flip it around, you're exactly right. The best leaders are present. And I'll never forget one of my favorite leaders that I ever had, my first one-on-one with him. He came around from behind his desk and actually pulled his chair around so he was sitting right next to me. And that spoke volumes. He was so respectful. He was respectful in what I had to say. And right there, it showed that we were a team and that he was on my side and wanted me to be successful. That small event right there set in motion a 20+ year relationship of respect and honor.
Yeah, it's that one little moment that took 5 seconds to pull a chair around, and you're still talking about it to this day because it sticks with you. It's an example of, they might not know, this leader might be taking the company in 10 different directions, not necessarily know where it's going, but that they respect you enough to pull their chair around. And not saying that's what your leader was not doing, but they were able to pull their chair around and meet you where you're at, and not say, exactly. Hey, I'm on top of you. I'm the authority here. That's right. Such a great story. And for anybody who's listening, that's something easy to do. If you're in a leadership position, if we are in this hybrid remote work, maybe you're in the office, maybe, somebody might be thinking, well, how do I do this over a Google Meet or Zoom or, a virtual meeting? Well, it's easy. Just if you have a couple monitors, make sure there's nothing up on your other screen, because somebody can see your head turn and they know when you're reading something else and not paying attention. So it's just these little things that you can still do.
So true. So true. People just want your time. They want your
Yeah.
time and your attention as a leader.
Yeah. And so what else? That's something so practical that I think I need to make sure when I go into my afternoon of meetings that I'm fully present and I'm practicing that. And so, what else? What's one other thing that we can do? And again, tying it back to this, I love the theme of courage in the workplace.
Yeah, I think, one of the other, let's talk tactic and then let's talk best
Sure.
practices, right?
Let's
Because
do
we
it.
certainly want to balance this out. One of the other tactics that some of these imposters leaders use is negative surprise meetings or conversations. So again, it's another intimidation tactic to use the element of surprise to put you back on your heels while aggressively communicating. Maybe it's a misperformance, or it could actually be gaslighting in disguise. And again, there's lots of information in the book about gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
They use this tactic because they know the element of aggressive surprise creates a visceral reaction within the other person, within the other person's body. Visceral reactions create restricted blood flow to the brain. There's whole neurology around it. The other person cannot think, they cannot respond. It leaves you confused. It leaves you with shattered confidence. You're confused. You're wondering how to move forward. And that's the exact intent of the conversation. And so if you ever find yourself in that position where it's a surprise conversation, just remember at the very beginning, A, B, C. Always be curious. And if you start asking questions, meaningful questions, tell me more about that. Tell me why you think that. The other individual is going to see that you're engaged in the conversation as well and hopefully bring down the tone. Now, it doesn't always work because if it is a gaslighting situation, they want to stir this up. They want this type of aggression to continue. So again, if it does and that technique doesn't work, ABC, always be curious, then you'll know that maybe there's something a little bit more sinister going on. And keep in mind, these tactics occur because there is a greater agenda. It doesn't mean that they're just picking on you. I think a lot of people are like, why doesn't that person like me? It has nothing to do with like or dislike. It has something to do with a bigger agenda that they're actually implementing through this particular tactic. So ABC, always be curious.
Always be curious. Always follow up with the feedback or the situation. If you're unclear, just thanks, tell me more.
Yes.
That's such a powerful reaction instead of digging your heels in and let's, battle it out. I learned that early on in my career that only lands you in hot water. And I did it once at the beginning of my career and I'll never forget it. It was a learning moment. If I ever decide to write a book like you did for your daughter, if I write one for my kids, like that'll be a story in there. Like it sticks with you. But it's also how you respond to it. It's so key. And, I love that ABC, always be curious. It's such an easy thing to do and an easy thing to remember.
It is. It's so easy to remember. And again, because it's a difficult situation, right? It's a difficult, critical conversation. And the best thing that you can do as a high-performing leader is always remain professional. Don't ever let these other individuals take you off your game. As they say in the SEAL program, don't ever ring the bell. Don't give in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's sometimes it's definitely easier said than done, especially when you're feeling beat down, worn out. And that's when, if you are feeling that way, yes, you can leave your job. But maybe there's opportunity to drive change internally and talking to somebody, whether it's another leader in your organization or your people and culture team or a trusted advisor or mentor, to talk about how you're feeling versus leaving your role. Maybe you do need to leave, and that would be unfortunate, especially if you do love what you're doing.
Absolutely. And sometimes you don't have that perspective until you do leave or until there's an inflection point. But always remember, it's never going to stay this way. Something is always going to change. You may get a different leader. If it's your leader that's the issue, your boss, they may get rotated in 4 to 6 months. So again, most people who are in these situations, they do feel that it's dire. A lot of them have sleepless nights. They can't understand why it's happening to them. And the key here is to understand that you will have clarity someday. You just don't have it now, and things will change. It will not always stay like this because you always have the choice ultimately. And we talk about choice in the book.
Yeah. And we do have choice. You're absolutely right. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on that choice that we do have. We don't have
Yes,
to stay in these situations. And, it's just getting your head, kind of clearing up things that are going on in your mind, in your head, and to be able to see things through the fog, I guess, for lack of a better analogy. But that's great. So we've kind of talked about a couple things about making sure that we're not leaving people unchecked, because people will come from all different sides of an organization, or all different levels at the organization, who may try and take your job, derail you, whether it's a small company or a large company. I've typically worked in some small companies, and the company that I work for now, we were talking yesterday about how we hired somebody new, and she was still kind of on the fence about things. And we're like, well, why? And she said, like, everyone is so nice and everyone has each other's back. Like, is this real? And I was thinking about going into this conversation, like, man, what happened? She's a young professional. Like, what happened in her previous roles that is leaving her skeptical? And it's sad, but yes, it exists. These organizations exist that have your back, care about you as an individual, want to see you succeed, regardless of gender and race, and want to see you to grow in your career.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is to find those companies. Find those companies that match your value system, and not just what they say on paper. I had a post, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, about when you interview. There's a lot of people who are in play right now and looking for a different role and maybe more flexibility someplace else. And, my unsolicited advice was, look for those companies who not only have their why figured out, but they have their how figured out. And what I mean by that is they're living their values on their wall. 14% of companies today live their company values. That means 86% don't. And so your coworker probably came from the 86%. And, you have to be careful where you go to work, because if your values aren't aligned and there isn't an infrastructure in place to support them, that's where most often these imposter leaders run wild and are completely unchecked.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's so timely, this book, Winning the Talent Shift, whether it's 2021, 2022, 2023, right now there's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation. People are leaving their jobs in droves. I heard one study that came out was 95% of people are thinking about leaving their jobs, which is just crazy. So how do you win? How do you win in that? And that is, you got to look internally. You've got to look at, are we living our values? Do we have our why? I love that you said, do we have our how figured out? It's like, why do we exist? Okay, we know why we exist, but how are we doing it? Like, that is again, I think we have a whole series of podcasts with you, Berta, coming up, because that's so key. And yeah, if we don't have our organizations in check, people are going to be looking for other roles, other jobs.
And you know what? You want to retain those individuals with the highest character. I always say that if you're hiring for anything, hire for character first, because those individuals they have this internal beacon that others are attracted to, and they have an internal light that kind of paves the way for others to follow. And hire them, let them do their job.
Yeah, I love that. Hire for character. We can we can all see somebody's LinkedIn and resume, right? If we believe that to be true. If it's not, well, then there's something wrong with the character of the individual, but it's higher for that character. That's so great. And I'm really curious, what has been that one piece of advice, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, maybe there's one piece of advice that you've shared with your daughter that is key, for her entering the workforce in corporate America. And so what is that one piece?
Always believe in yourself. And I know that is so cliche, and I wish I had something better that just came off the top of my head. But far too often, other people try to drag you down, not because you're below them, but because you're above them. And if you just remember that, you actually can put everything in perspective, maintain your confidence, keep moving forward, but do not ever let anyone deplete your confidence or derail your career when you know what path you're on.
Oh, it is cliche, but it's so true. Believe in yourself. And I love it. I recently recorded a podcast, and we were talking about insecurities and how often, if we don't believe in ourselves, these insecurities, this internal voice picks up. So always believe in yourself. That's such great advice. And for those who are listening, I highly encourage you to pick up the book, Winning the Talent Shift. It's a phenomenal, practical book. It's not just from your perspective, Berta. And what I love about it is towards the end of the chapters, it has a plan. Like, here's what you do, which a lot of books out there don't have that plan, and yours does. And so I think it's such a great read, and it's something that we need to be focusing on. We need to be looking at are there unchecked leaders, and what's it doing to the diversity of our workforce? I think that is such a key element. We didn't really touch on that too much today, but that's such a key element that you've written into the book is women are leaving our organizations at a faster rate than men, and that's just reality. How do we change that? And that's something that we need to be focusing on in now, today, not tomorrow, but today.
Today, because if your company wants to win the Great Resignation, they need to create change now. And that's where your greatest leaders that are listening to this podcast, we're counting on you to have the courage to do it.
Yes. I love how you've tied it all together. It's having the courage to do so. If you're seeing this behavior in your organization and you don't know what to do, again, recommend you reach out to Berta, to myself. Let's help you get there. And I know, Berta, that you coach and you mentor, and there's almost no excuse to be stuck. There's resources, there's people that can help you to get unstuck. So with that, I just want to thank you, Berta, for coming on. We could go on for a couple hours, I think, on the podcast, and it's such a pleasure to talk to you. And for those who are listening, I really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I have. There's so many practical insights in here. And if you like what you heard today, please let us know. In the show notes, I'll put a link to Berta's LinkedIn, as well as how to get a hold of her through her website. And again, the book, Winning the Talent Shift. Pick it up today. And with that, I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again, Berta, for coming on.
It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you.